park when we had the picnic there. It was always the treat of the summer. So it's nice to be back here. We were delighted to have Northern Cuyahoga County in the current 25th district, but we're even happier that we will have all of Cuyahoga County in the new New York 24th district. So we're glad to be here. I'm just going to make a few brief introductory remarks, and then I want to open it up to all of you. I'm so delighted that you're here. It's so important that we talk. It's so important that you feel you have access to your representative so that you have a voice in Washington. So thank you all very much for taking time out of your early afternoon to be here. Before we start, I do want to introduce my staff because oftentimes when you call my office, that's who you will interact with, or if you have a tour or if you have an issue, this is who you'll talk to and then they'll communicate with me. So I have in the back of the room, actually Matthew Satterley, Jennifer Brewer, and Kate Lucasfell. If you could raise your hands. They are all from the Washington office, but we are up doing district work weeks for much of August, so they're up here meeting and talking to and touring the facilities and all the folks they've talked to over the phone from Washington. Deb Esley, as many of you know, Deb is really the coordinator and does all of the work for the western end of the district, Wayne County and Monroe County, and she's just terrific. I'm sure many of you have talked to her. I know she's been on top of the whole dredging issue and so many of the issues that face Fairhaven, Fairhaven County, and Wayne County. Let's see, who else are we going to have? Joe. And is there anyone else from the district office here besides Joe? No. Joe Cusack is here, and Joe is he's our from the district office here in Syracuse. As you know, we have a district office in Irondequoit. We have a major one is in Syracuse, downtown Syracuse, in the Federal Building. And then we also have, well, we're talking about, we are successful, we'll have a district in County in Auburn. So one of the things that we decided as a team after we were successful in 2010 was that the White House and the Senate were controlled by the Democratic Party, the Republicans had the House. So being trying to be realistic about what we could accomplish legislatively and every other which way, we decided as a team that we would make constituent service our top priority. Because whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or you believe in either side of the spectrum or these major issues that we're talking about as a nation we're facing, when someone calls our office, the most important thing we can do is whether it's a Medicare issue, a Social Security issue, an immigration issue, a veterans issue, a military issue, someone at the other end of the phone will be there, will be responsive, and will help that person solve the problem. And that's what our office has done. It's really what I'm most proud of as a congressional office, the kind of constituent service that we've had. We have opened and closed over 1,000 cases, constituent service cases. We work for all of you. And I hope you will feel free if you have an issue with regards to any one of those matters or any other. And sometimes we'll even intervene, and if it's a state issue, we'll open the door to one of the electeds on the state level to help you. Your government should work for you, and that's what we have tried to do. And we understand that you pay our salaries, we work for you, we're accountable to you, and that's what our goal has been for the last year and a half. I do want to say, we were in Cuyahoga County when I was running for Congress. We rolled out Compact 25, and we were in Cato where we announced in Cuyahoga County about Compact 25. And I made a pledge to the people in the district that I would be accountable, accessible, responsible, and independent. And of all of those, I think the accessibility was most important because you need to be able to contact me, to talk to me, and I need to come out to the community. So we've had over 20 live town halls. We've had 6 teletown halls. We've done online town halls, and we do teletown halls where we talk to thousands of people. If there's anything that you need help with, if there's an issue you have, I hope you'll feel free to contact us so we can have a conversation so we can help you solve the problems. Again, we work for you, we're happy, we're at your service. I just want to make sure you understand that has been a major focus of my congressional office. So I really won't talk too much about what's going on in Washington because we've been home since August, we've been home since. So there isn't a whole lot going on down in Washington. What I did roll out, we actually dropped it a few weeks ago, this past week. We dropped legislation called the Mary Colella Autoimmune Awareness Act. And my sister had multiple sclerosis, and she passed away from it a number of years ago. So I knew personally how autoimmune diseases affect the family. But as we became more and more aware of the number of people who have been affected by autoimmune diseases, and that includes celiac disease, multiple sclerosis, myasthenia gravis, it's vitiligo, it's psoriasis, it's probably in the area of 100 diseases fall into that autoimmune category. We decided we should do something about it. And so what we did, this piece of legislation that we introduced and leadership has told us, and we hope that during the lame duck session it will come out in committee and it will be voted on. But what it does is it takes several departments, it's an interdepartmental committee that will be set up, because what happens is DOD, the Veterans Administration, the National Institute for Health, CDC, they're all doing research about autoimmune diseases. This interdepartmental committee will bring representatives from each of those groups together, and they will assess our national progress on autoimmune diseases, and they will most importantly make sure that the healthcare providers, the physicians, and the hospitals have the most current research that's done on that. And then they'll make recommendations for a national curriculum for autoimmune diseases. So it really, number one, raises awareness of autoimmune diseases, and beyond that, we'll bring together the research to make sure that we are using that research and the results of all that money that's being invested in research most effectively, most efficiently, so those with autoimmune diseases can get the treatment they need. What I've heard over and over and over again is that people will say, I went to my physician and I went back and went back, and it was so difficult to get a diagnosis. And if we raise awareness of autoimmune diseases, if we get it in some information into the curriculum that our medical students and nursing students are studying, and we raise the awareness, I think that we will hopefully facilitate earlier diagnosis. Before I get started with your questions, I would like to ask all of our veterans who are here today to stand up so we can all say thank you to you for your service to this country. Thank you for your service. I have the honor of serving on the Veteran Affairs Committee, and I'm a chairwoman of the subcommittee on health. And I've seen up close and personal, whether it's in Walter Reed or Bethesda or Brooke Army or our own Syracuse VA Hospital, the tremendous sacrifice that our men and women in the military make, and their families make that sacrifice right alongside of them. So thank you for your service, and as we enjoy this beautiful morning this morning, I guess it's afternoon now, please keep in your thoughts and your prayers the men and women who serve our nation and are in harm's way to keep us free and to keep us safe. With that, I'd like to open it up to questions. And we'll, before we get started, I do want to say thank you to the mayor, and thank you to the mayor, and thank you for your hospitality and for hosting us here. This is just couldn't be better. We're so glad to be here. Thank you.
Let's see, there's no name on this one. Changes in worker compensation interpretation and effects on long-standing claims. Who would that question be?
Is there anything you want to add to your question? Or?
No, just with all I'm saying is when watching changes of interpretation of existing laws because of what's going on with Obamacare and causing, it's much more difficult for doctors and healthcare providers to be able to do the same things consistently. And it's not like necessarily the law has actually changed, but the interpretation of the way things are going with that is making it much more difficult for the care providers to be able to do. I'll give you a simple thing. I have to go through a process now to have an x-ray taken, and a long-standing claim with it's a work comp claim with my orthopedic surgeon. And I'm wondering, is the effects of that, if it continues on with this, because I know it's affecting workers' comp, it's affecting people on Social Security disability, and it's changing the way. I do not want Canadian healthcare, and we're headed in that direction the way it's going right now.
Maybe either Deb or someone from my staff can talk with you about specifics. Workers' compensation is really a state issue, workers' comp law, but we can see how that factors into what you're saying.
There's also the Social Security.
The Social Security disability is one.
I'll find you afterwards.
Sure.
Judy O'Gorman, Fairhaven, our harbor is silting up. Why haven't you supported the ramp of the Great Lakes that will allow our safe harbor to be dredged?
The issue about dredging in the harbor, we have been on top of that issue. And in fact, Matthew in the back of the room is working with Louise Slaughter's office of legislation. One of the issues with little sodas is it's been deemed by the Army Corps to be recreational. So it receives a lower priority than, say, Sodas Bay. But we are very much on top of, and the legislation that Matthew's working out with Louise Slaughter's office is that, look, there needs to be a certain amount of the Army Corps budget allocated for these areas that have been designated as recreational areas. Because although the Army Corps says they're recreational, they still need to be functional, and it does affect commerce. The other, recently we passed in the House Appropriations Bill, Energy and Water Act, and I actually voted against it because that appropriation cut the Army Corps by $188 million, which will, and we use that opportunity to talk to, look, our canals, our bays, they need to be dredged because of the commerce, because of the economic impact it has on our communities. So we are on top of that issue, and we are working hard to make sure that that's made attention to.
Oh, this is from Sam Calvin, and it's similar. He says, will you please sign HR 104 to dredge our channel? This means $10 million per year and 40 jobs to our community. No new taxes and more jobs, and that's what you campaigned on. That's from Sam.
Thank you, Sam.
I retired from the Army Corps of Engineers, Buffalo District, and the Corps had 3 dredges, and now there's only one left, the Jericho McCauley. Okay, it worked up there. So I was an inspector up there. We repaired the wall where the state park is. Now they came in here, they had to get a shell draft talked about because of the shell on there. There was a lot of sand on the harbor side. They had to throw it in after they left. But I'm sure the Army Corps could get the Jericho McCauley to come here to dredge that channel. Now the Jericho McCauley's in Cleveland. Matt Snyder's in charge of the office in Cleveland, which I know. I could talk to them, you know what I mean? But all they got to do is get the go-ahead. They don't have the one Jericho, but it has worked up in there. The Jericho McCauley usually was from New York. You know, did the work in New York.
Thank you. Maybe what we could do is, I'm sure there are a number of people who are interested about the canal issues and the bay issues and dredging. Matthew could, right after whoever's interested, including you, sir, if you wouldn't mind, just sit down for a few minutes with Matthew and make sure he's up to speed, make sure you give him that information, and we can have sort of a sub-town hall when we're done to deal with that issue, make sure we have everything that you all are paying attention to. And that brings up a point, and that is that we, you know, whether you're in agriculture or whether you're a small business owner or whether you're a senior citizen, you're paying attention to the issues that affect you most directly. And we need you to be responsive and to reach out to our office. If you're concerned about something that's not going to be funded, or you're concerned about an issue or a new regulation with EPA that's going to affect your farm, and please reach out to us and put it on our radar screen so that we can advocate for you, whether it's in a committee. Sometimes if there's a piece of legislation that's coming out, they're discussing it in Washington. If you give us a heads up and it's going to be harmful, it's going to cause another layer of bureaucracy to running your farm or whatever the business is, reach out to us. Put that on our radar screen so we can maybe stop it from coming out of committee. We can have a discussion before it's into a bill and before it's going to be voted on. So, because you're paying attention to your issues, and we love to hear from you about those.
I didn't get a chance to answer. You picked my question, but I didn't get a chance to say anything.
Oh.
And I'm not going to pass on the microphone. Anne-Marie, first of all, we're glad you're here. And for this little village and this community, that channel is vital to us. It's very important. It means a lot to us in the way of jobs, like 40. It means $10 million a year to us if we can't get in and out of that channel. And we would encourage you to sign this HR 104. And if you can't see your way to do that, help us understand what your plan is. I guess maybe we would be willing to accept the $10 million a year we're going to lose if that could be your plan. But which isn't very realistic. But we need, you have represented from here to Rochester along that shore. And we need to keep those channels open. It's a lot to the community, means a lot to the community. So we really need your support, and we would really appreciate you getting on board with the rest of the congressmen in the state and help us with that.
Thank you very much. We will look at it, and we will. I don't see any reason why we will not support it.
We would really appreciate it.
And Emery.
We're going to take questions in order, sir.
Well, this is in regards to the channel, before we go to the next question. Back in the late 50s, they dredged the channel with a pump, and they pumped the sand by a flume over the wall that goes out into the lake. The sand was deposited on the other side, and we perhaps had the best beach along Lake Ontario with all that sand that was pumped out of the channel. Now, I guess for some environmental reasons, the last time they used a drag line and a barge, and the drag line was on the barge, and they would dump the sand into the barge, dump the sand into the barge, and then take it out in the lake, God knows how far, and then it was dumped out in the lake. Versus, easy way would be to pump it out over the wall and give us a good beach back, you know, because all that sand that's down there has blown away, and there's nothing but rocks down there now. So that would be a shortcut if we could get some relaxation in the Environmental Protection Agency, who does more to hinder than really to make progress.
Thank you.
Judy Rappaport from Oswego. We had 8 years of trickle-down economics with banks causing the worst economic disaster since the Depression. What makes Riggs, Romney, Reagan, Virgil plan any different?
Well, we had 8 years of trickle-down economics with banks causing the worst economic disasters. And I agree with that the banks were partly to blame for the economic meltdown. I missed Judy Rappaport. Do you want to stand here? Thank you for your question. But there were regulations in place at the time, and I think this is a good time to have a discussion about regulations. It's important to have regulations, but it isn't the quantity of regulations, it's the quality. Correct. So we do need regulations that would have addressed this, and they didn't have it. Apparently what's on the books, and there are a lot of them, didn't affect us. And we still don't have legislation. They passed a massive Dodd-Frank bill, which is 2,300 pages, which creates all sorts of bureaucracy. And that does not deal with Fannie and Freddie, which were another reason for the meltdown. So I agree with you, But we've got to proceed judiciously so that when we enact regulations, those regulations take care of the problem rather than just creating layers and layers of bureaucracy and costs.
Well, I just watched Malcolm Forbes on CNN yesterday, and he said he absolutely wants free economy, no regulation. And I'm sitting here listening. Even Adam Smith, the founder of capitalism, agreed with regulation. The banks are bigger than they ever have been before. We do have Hoover bills that were created after the Depression. It's one of the reasons we have Social Security and all of those other things in place is because people weren't protected. We have people waiting in line for health care and dental care in this country. To me, that is just absurd. And these banks and corporations have untold wealth that they've been sitting on for years. It's just not, it's not right. It's not American.
Well, you brought up. I think when we talk about Dodd-Frank and regulations, that does not handle what you're talking about, too big to fail. So you can have the government stepping in again and bailing out these large corporations as well as large banks. So I agree with you that these regulations need to be looked at to make sure they deal with the problems you're talking about that actually cause the meltdown.
When you talk about the health of the American public and the American people, our founding fathers agreed. I teach history. Our founding fathers created the premise that it was important to educate the people so they can vote intelligently and all of those other things. And they felt that it was important to help the American people that can't help themselves. And I see all these people saying all these things that poor people, they're blaming the poor people for what they are. You have kids in Florida living in hotels because their parents have lost their jobs. I mean, to me, that's so unacceptable of this country. You have outsourcing. Put people back to work. And you know, the people here, the consumers, are just as guilty because the consumers wanted something cheap. So they buy from China. And then China puts in, and they poison the toys and things like this. The American consumer, we still have the richest economy in the world. If the American consumer said today, I will not buy anything but American, those factories would be back in this country. I can guarantee you they would. It's up to the American public, and it's up to you as our representative to spread that word.
You've got a whole lot of issues in here. First,
I wanted to get it all at once.
The first thing is your issue about regulations. I agree with you, and I want to make it clear. Governor Romney, Paul Ryan, nor myself think that we should get rid of regulations. But the cost of regulations in the United States of America to our businesses, which gets translated to the cost of anything you consume or you buy, is somewhere around $1.7 trillion. It's a huge amount of money. The regulations have exceeded, it isn't quantity, it's quality of regulations, and making sure we keep our environment safe, making sure that we get rid of this too big to fail notion, making sure that consumers are protected. I agree with you, and I've not seen anything anywhere that would say Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney understand, and nobody is talking about getting rid of regulations, but what we need to do is be reasonable. And when you talk to, when I talk to businesses and I go around to small business owners, to farmers, the regulations that they are asked to comply with is to the point where if a lot of the farmers say, this farm's been in my family for generations, but I can no longer deal with the EPA telling me about this little puddle on my farm, or so there is a balance. And as a nation, we've got to strike that balance about keeping the environment safe, keeping people safe, keeping employees safe, but also not stifling the economy. And if you want to look at the economy and look why we haven't done well, we haven't gotten past this 8.2, 8.3% unemployment, underemployment probably around 17% in this nation, it's because the government has created such uncertainty for our small businesses, whether it's the regulatory environment. And we passed in the House several bills that would say, okay, if you're going to pass a regulation, if you're going to enact a regulation, it's going to have an impact of over $100 billion on businesses. we've got to talk about that. The Congress has to look at that, so that, because one of the problems we have is the regulators don't follow the legislative process. And so many times a bill is passed, look at the healthcare law, or look at Dodd-Frank. The law is the law, but then it's handed over to the regulators, and then they come up with this range of regulations. Just since 2010, we've probably had 42 new major regulations, and at a cost of about $26 billion to this nation. If you want to know why companies are going overseas, because it's awful hard to do business in the United States of America. We have the highest corporate tax rate here. We have the regulatory environment that's killing our businesses. So they say, first they leave New York, and we know the struggles we've had in upstate New York. They go to Texas or they go to North Carolina where they can find a little bit easier place to operate and do business. And then when that doesn't work, they go overseas. It's a business decision. You've got a small medical device, well-channeled over it, it was in the paper. They're going to be taxed 2.3% in the Affordable Care Act, the new health care law. What did he say? If I go to Europe or I go overseas, China, I can set up this business, I can do this business, and I won't have to pay the millions and millions and millions of dollars in this excise tax. So when we enact regulations, there's got to be a balance that we're not driving our companies and our businesses and even our small businesses away to shut down and say, you know, when I have a dairy farmer, she said this farm's been in our family for generations, but I spend more time on my computer trying to comply with regulations than I am out there. She said, so I say to my son, what's the point? I'm not doing what I love. So your point is extremely well made. We need regulations. No one's saying that we shouldn't have them, but we need a balance. We need to get our foot off the throats of small businesses.
You're correct. I grew up on a farm, and my dad had to put up with regulations. And what happens is like with the EPA, they cut their staff. So, I mean, they have all these regulations and no staff to address the concerns that the farmers have. So it's a never-ending cycle.
Thank you.
Next question that we drew here is Phyllis Smith, Fairhaven, dredging. And it says the depths of the channel to Fairhaven Bay is reaching a point that some boats will not be able to enter or exit the bay. What is your position on the bill that allows the Corps of Engineers to dredge small harbors like ours?
Thank you. And we will address that. I think we get the group together and we'll talk about dredging.
Yeah, we will meet afterwards on that.
Geraldine Ellis, Fairhaven, the STAR program. I'm not sure what.
Geraldine, are you here?
I was just, I've heard rumors that you're going to do away with the STAR program, the Indian STAR. Is this true?
Is the STAR program the tax? Yes. That's a state issue. We can look into it and see if there is. We can talk to Senator DeFrancisco's office and find out if there's any truth to that. I've not heard that.
I've heard the rumors going around. I'm a reading person.
We'll have the staff look into it. I've not heard anything other than what you're saying today, but we'll look to see if New York State is. Yeah, I know my mother uses it. Takes advantage of it. It's a great Thank you. Thank you.
I seem to always draw something on the dredging issue. Don Richardson asks, Fairhaven asks, why do you oppose funding for channel dredging?
I don't know why you're asking that question. I don't oppose funding for dredging the channel.
Don Richardson.
Don, are you here? I don't oppose it. I don't know what you're basing that on. I voted against cutting the Army Corps of Engineers because I don't think the Army Corps needs to be equipped with more money. And that was our opportunity to talk about that. We cannot take funds away from the Army Corps of Engineers. They need that money so that they can do the dredging and they can take care of the channels.
So the bottom line is funds are needed. What are you doing to get one?
Well, we're working on legislation that we would introduce that says, because when you've got like little soils, when you're calling it recreational, that there would be a certain number of funds allocated for recreational facilities to make sure that they get dredged as they need to be, so it doesn't affect the economy. we've been very involved with not only the dredging issue, but the IJC issue, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. This commission came out and said they're going to change the lake levels. And we've been very involved. We met with the commissioners in Washington. We had a hearing in Williamson and introduced legislation that said until it's the BB7 program that would change the lake levels of Lake Ontario. So we introduced legislation in the budget that said until the IJC puts forth and does a study into the economic impact of what that BB7 plan will do to Lake Ontario, that they can't proceed in implementing the BB7 plan. So we've been very involved with, we know, we've heard from businesses, the Port of Oswego, property owners, the marinas, the impact that plan, that BB7 plan will have, the economic impact. And you know, the IJC is an unelected group, they're appointees. And again, you get back to when you're dealing with, you know, one agenda versus another, there's got to be a balance. Nobody here in this room wants Lake Ontario to be unhealthy. Nobody here wants it to be polluted or that the flora be destroyed. But we have to balance that with how are we going to protect property owners and the business owners, the Port of Oswego and the economic impact we have on that. And so that's we're working with IJC. They need to be accountable. They need to let us know what have they looked at and understand and appreciate the economic impact that BB7 plan would have. Okay, next question.
Dick Petruccio, Fairhaven, what is your position on funding for dredging for Jen?
This is another one, of course, it's dredging. But there are two questions here, so it'll be a segment. The current channel to Lake Ontario, Little Soda Jetty, has a very low water level. In some places it is 6 feet or less, mostly due to wave action of the lake dropping sand in the channel. We need the channel to be dredged ASAP, as many of our businesses depend on it for income. And so question one is, can we depend on your support to get our harbors maintained as was done in the past? And then question two is, what is your view on term limits? So that's a little different.
You know, I campaigned that I thought term limits were a good idea. When you go down to Washington and you look at folks who've been down there for 20 years, 30 years, you really need to, it's time to go. And it's both sides of the aisle, and you just get into it. And here's the challenge that my freshman class had. We all went down there, we were all gung ho. We got to make changes to the way the government works. We got to make it more efficient. We got to make it more effective. We got to be more responsive to the American people. And we get down there, and you know, many of my colleagues in my class put down our professions, put our lives on hold, and said, okay, we're going to do this because we see our nation headed in a different direction than it should be headed in. So we get down there, and we hit a wall. That wall, that wall. We hit a wall, and the wall are the establishment, Republicans and Democrats, who are really happy with the status quo.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, we've had to buck leadership. We've had to be aggressive because the nation is in trouble. The nation has a debt that's going to reach $16 trillion. We've got to do something about that. We're borrowing 42 cents on every dollar. We've got, as a nation, we've got to look at Medicare. We've got to look at Social Security. We've got to look at all of the things we do as a nation, the contracts and the agreements we have with our seniors, and make sure that Medicare remains alive and well, so that the seniors who depended on it plan their retirement around it, it will be there for them. But the status quo isn't going to work. The Medicare actuaries have said by 2024, Medicare will be bankrupt. And we don't have any discussion about what we're going to do about that. And since we're on that topic, I'll talk a little bit about Medicare because I know there's a lot of folks in this room who are concerned about Medicare. Right now, the threat, and I would say the biggest threat to Medicare is the new Affordable Care Act, the health care law.
That's right. That's
Because
right.
it cuts Medicare by $716 billion. The CBO just rescored that. Originally, we were talking about $500 billion cuts. Now, that was something that you didn't hear too much about until Ryan got on the ticket, because he's adamant. He knows what was in that budget. He knows the Affordable Care Act. And he said the Affordable Care Act, and now it's become a national debate, which it should be, because Medicare affects and millions and millions of Americans who rely on Medicare. The Affordable Care Act cuts Medicare by $716 billion, and it creates an IPAB board, an independent payment advisory board. And the role of that group in Washington will be to look at what Medicare covers and will make cuts, because that's their role, is to cut the cost of Medicare in our country. Now, a lot of folks don't like to talk about that, because if you were in favor of the Affordable Care Act, which there are a lot of good parts to it, it's keeping your kids on your policy till they're 26, making sure that someone doesn't get denied for pre-existing conditions. Those are good things. So if the intent was, and like the woman in the back here talked about, people having access to health care, how important that is. But then you look at what it's done to Medicare, and there's no way, no how, that Affordable Care Act is not going to affect the services that are given to seniors, whether it's in a hospital or a physician. That $716 billion cut is a threat to Medicare. And so that to me is the biggest issue that we have to deal with, and how we're going to do that. Now, what Ryan did in the budget we passed in 2012 is, because we started at that baseline, because the Affordable Care Act is the law, you have to start at that baseline. He took that $716 billion and he put it back into Medicare to make it more viable. He did not create another entitlement. What's not fair about the Affordable Care Act is it takes that $716 billion and it funds the Affordable Care Act. That's what it does. It creates, whether you agree or disagree with it, they needed that money to fund the Affordable Care Act. And so the biggest threat we have today is the law which goes into effect in 2014 and cuts Medicare. We've seen seniors come in our office, and they talk to me about their physician is going to limit the number of Medicare patients they take. There's nothing in the law that assures physicians that whole doc fix. The Medicare reimbursement will cover their costs at the very least, but at this point it doesn't. And it cuts Medicare reimbursements in the hospitals. And in our district, our largest employers are hospitals, Syracuse University and our hospitals. And when I talk to the hospitals, they're very concerned, because not only are they getting cut because of the health care law, but they're also getting cut because of sequestration. And so the kind of care we give to our seniors and the whole Medicare issue is really going to be brought to the forefront, because we're going to see an impact on the services the seniors receive.
Buster Braley, Red Creek, what can we do to stimulate the economy? Not
Buster, where are you? Great question. You know, I think the best thing we can do for this economy, and earlier I mentioned the $1 trillion debt this nation has. We can't tax our way out of that debt, and we can't cut our way out of the debt. So your point is, well, it's so important. We have to initiate a pro-growth economic agenda that gets the economy and that energizes the private sector, that energizes the entrepreneurs, that energizes those people who have a dream and they want to work hard, they want to grow their dream. And until we do that, the economy is going to remain stagnant. There's such uncertainty right now in the economy. Employers and small businesses don't know how the Affordable Care Act, the health care law is going to affect them. They don't know what's going to happen to their tax rates. Just in August, before we came home, we voted to extend tax rates, the tax on dividends, the estate tax, extend those current rates for a year, because businesses don't know how to plan. They don't know, they just don't know how that's going to impact them, plus the regulations we were talking about earlier. So there's such uncertainty if you're a small business owner or you own a farm. You don't know what's going to come down the pipe next. And so everyone just sits on their cash, if they have it. Or the banks are sitting on theirs, and no one is investing, no one is hiring. We hear with the Affordable Care Act, if you've got more than 50 employees, if you go beyond that, then you've got to provide the services, the health care coverage. And so they say, I don't want to hire you, and how that law is going to impact you. So I think as a nation, we've got to send a message to the private sector that they're the solution, they're not the problem. We have to create certainty for them, whether it's with tax rates, the Affordable Care Act, regulations. You know, we spent a lot of time this past session in the House. How are we going to undo some of these regulations? And the woman who, I think she's left now, but with regulations and that balance. But we've got to look at the regulations and figure out which ones are working and which ones are just a burden that don't have any good effect on businesses. And then we've got to unroll those. So we've got to create certainty for our businesses. You know, we've got the largest corporate tax rate, the highest corporate tax rate, one of them in the world. I think we were only second to Japan, but I think they lowered theirs. You know, the regulatory environment, we've got, you know, capital gains that should reduce or eliminate capital gains for a period of time. We've got to energize the economy. And the government cannot create jobs. The government can create an environment. But the only jobs that the government creates are those that are funded by the government, and that's a problem. Now, and I shouldn't say, because we voted on the transportation bill, I voted on it in, because it's good for our district, we have a lot of companies here, to make sure, and that's another issue of uncertainty, to make sure that our construction companies, they can rely on having a budget to build roads and infrastructure, which is a legitimate role of the government. But one of the problems to talk about uncertainty is we haven't had a budget in this country since 2009. The Senate hasn't passed a budget since 2009, and we haven't, you know, we've passed a budget in 2011, 2012, but there's no budget. So we operate with these continuing resolutions, these stops and starts every 6 months. And again, it fosters that uncertainty. Will the funding be there? Can I get a contract? And last but not least, sequestration. In our district, in the district, current 25th district, sequestration will affect many of our defense companies. We have probably 2,000 Department of Defense contracts with the defense companies here in upstate New York, and the impact is in the millions and millions of dollars and jobs. So sequestration is of concern to us because of the cuts both to the Department of Defense and these contracts. So we really have to focus on making sure the private sector, and not the big businesses, the woman who I keep referring to her, talked about corporations. You know, with regards to corporations, we need to eliminate the loopholes, we need to simplify, we need tax reform in this country terribly. We need it urgently. But in the meantime, it's the small business owners. That's who we have to encourage. It's the person, you know, I toured an electric company in Syracuse. They have 40 employees. That woman is, you know, she's got a great business. She profit shares with her employees. We're going to make sure that we don't raise her taxes. She says to me, you know, if you raise my taxes, the 10% profit share I give to my 40 employees, that goes away because I'm putting more money into my taxes. Those kinds of things, if we understand the impact that the government has on these small business owners, on our farmers, and on all of our small businesses. Yes, sir.
As my fingers still go walking blindly through the box, I pick some of the questions. This one is from Karen Lee in Millis, New York. And why haven't you backed the bill to have our channel registered?
Oh, come on.
Some other questions, please, Bill.
You're looking up a dead horse's ass, Bill.
It goes 6 feet to the standing borders on travelers from around Lake Ontario, including Canada, will not be able to access the channel. This would devastate.
Let's get some other questions.
Get some other questions.
Let's get some other questions.
What more did she say? Let's see.
Wait. And also the marinas and yacht club that have been on the bay for many years. Also, boaters caught in storms on the lake would no longer have access to the bay for safety.
We got a lot of problems.
This is from David Road, Sterling, Fairhaven. No question.
Oh, that
You read it.
we read it already.
Well, she didn't answer it.
Yes, she did.
No, I want to know her view on the term limits.
Oh, the term limits. I think there should be term limits. In fact, a colleague of mine from Tennessee, Phil Rowe, who happens to be a physician, is going to be introducing legislation, so he says, and his thing, he says, I know this won't go anywhere, is we term limit the Supreme Court, we term limit the Senate, we term limit the House. All of those are constitutional issues, so it all needs to be done through constitutional amendments. But there is discussion about that, and I think you need to get new energy, you need to get new ideas down there. You know, he talked about making Congress, what he's proposing, there's several proposals out there. Maybe making a four-year.
My view is, I think that's a problem with our company. Is people have been there too long.
And it's both sides
You
of
gotta
that.
have new ideas.
And the status quo, you know, as a nation, whether you're Republican or Democrat, the status quo isn't working in a lot of areas. And you got to be willing to shake up. You got to be not thinking about your next election. You got to be thinking about what's best for this country. And that's the problem with these folks that just want to, well, and they want to make it a career versus, you know, what the forefathers intended to be down there, work for a few years.
But it has to be short.
Thank you.
Barbara Osterhouse, Fairhaven, food penalty, she's the food pantry co-chair.
Oh, yes.
She sees the increase every month in customers. Priority, should be a priority in the campaign, and jobs.
Thank you. And
I just wanted to reiterate that I think on the economy, sometimes impact may be the emphasis on flourishing the economy so that we don't get the numbers that we get every month.
absolutely correct. The jobs in the economy are the number one issue in getting the American people back to work. And whether it's in the presidential campaign or it's in my campaign, there are two very different approaches as to how we're going to do that. And I don't think if we raise taxes or we create more laws and more regulations, that we're going to necessarily empower the private sector and get America back to work. I think the stimulus failed. We spent close to $1 trillion on a stimulus. It was $787 billion, but by the time they had the interest in, and unemployment has been above 8% for the last 42 months. So that didn't work. So as a nation, we said, okay, well, let's try something different. Let's not spend more money. You know, when you see some of the ways the stimulus was spent, the greatness of this nation is because of the American people. It's because of the people who lay awake at night and worry about a bottom line, who get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and worry about their dairy cows, or plant a crop, and we'll talk about crops in a minute because our district has been significantly hurt by frost and flooding. But the best thing we can do, I believe, as a nation, is to empower individuals, to encourage the entrepreneurial spirit that makes America unlike any other nation. Many of you here, I talk about my grandparents often, who came to this country because in their gut, they couldn't speak English, they were from Italy. They knew that America offered a promise, an opportunity, that if they were willing to work hard, they could do well. Well, we're the policies, and not just this administration. It's wrong to say this all happened in this administration. This is something that's gone back. You know, George Bush spent money, George Bush lost his way. This is not strictly this president. This has gone on for many, many years. I think the last president who stood up about the proper role of government, how to unleash the private sector and the entrepreneurial spirit was Ronald Reagan. Since then, I really do think we can do better at getting Americans back to work. It should be our #1 priority because when people are working, they're happier. Medicare is stronger, Social Security is stronger. You don't have to raise taxes because more people are paying taxes and paying into the system. So there's just a whole lot of reasons why that should be our priority.
I think another thing that bothers me, because I remember when it wasn't so prevalent, but the lack of bipartisanship.
The lack of bipartisanship and, you know, the media. Excluded. The media thrives on conflict. I mean, that's just, people don't read the news. You know, we've done, and we've worked across the aisle. There's an awful lot going on in Washington. You know, Carolyn Maloney from New York, she's a Democrat from downstate. She and I co-chair the task force on human trafficking. You know, when it comes to veterans, the initiatives we've taken, I have a new caucus that I started with Mike Michaud, the ranking member from Maine on my health subcommittee. We put together this coalition of, it's a caucus to say, look, communities got to be involved, re-engaging communities to make sure our veterans have when they come home. When it comes to veteran issues, that's a really bipartisan. We just passed, the president just signed into law a new piece of legislation that included my sexual assault bill into it. There are things. We passed a transportation bill. You know, could it be better? Yes. But the other side of that issue is that when you have one party in all three houses, you get stuff passed through. Some would argue, well, look what happened in 2008. We had the Affordable Care Act, we had Dodd-Frank, we had stimulus. There was no checks and balances. So what's happening now, if you look at the discussion we're having, it really is a debate about the issues and what vision we're fighting for. But it forces everybody to pay attention, forces the lawmakers to defend their position, and things don't sail through. So there's a robust discussion going on. And I think that's more in line with what our values intended. Yes, sir.
I have another one unsigned, as usual. With so much of your district bordering the south shore of Lake Ontario, can you explain why you voted against the transportation bill, which would have provided for dredging of our channel?
I voted for the transportation bill.
There was the ramp.
What I did,
Barbara Kesselman, Fairhaven, New York, dredging the channel.
From Butch Lele, Fairhaven, New York. Does concern about the economy, loss of jobs to foreign manufacturers, disagreement with Obama and his cutthroats, participation in the UN and their policy, voter identification, illegal migration along our borders, etc., make me, as defined by Homeland Security, Big Sis and Company, make me a domestic terrorist?
That's my question. No, it's one question.
Was all that late?
Yeah, we know you're.
obviously not. I know the discussion came up, and obviously, no, I don't believe it makes you. I know they've said that, but those are American values we're talking about.
Only within the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Ever since 9/11, when they developed that Homeland Security, and now with Big Sis in charge, they're more terrorists than the common people.
We have heard, and we've been very vocal about some of the initiatives coming out of the UN. There was one with small weapons and weapons. There was one about parental rights, one with disabilities, and with 3 initiatives coming out of the UN and taking
It takes everything away from us.
That's right. The Constitution, and we sent a letter to Secretary Clinton as well as to the President and to leadership saying that, look, the United States and the United States is a sovereign nation. We're not going to take, nor should we take, advice from the UN.
Take the UN out of the
We did vote on legislative vote on it. The bill came out of Foreign Affairs, and a bill that would say any contributions that the United States of America makes to the UN would be voluntary rather than mandatory. You know, we had an instance just not too long ago. Palestine went to the UN and UNESCO and asked to be recognized as a sovereign state, and we pulled back funding to UNESCO because that's not something they should be doing. There needs to be, Palestine and Israel need to sit down and discuss a peace process in an early manner. You can't circumvent that process and go through the UN. So there are ways to pull back funding from the UN, certain programs.
We just funded the renovation of that building down in New York.
Kathy Crawford, and this will be the last question before your She's from Fairhaven.
Why?
Her question is it true that now at military funerals, the words "on behalf of the President of the United States" has been changed by the White House to "on behalf of the Secretary of Defense," with the presentation of the U.S. flag to the family of the deceased?
I don't know that, but we can find that out. Who asked the question?
I had heard, I got an email
to that effect. And it kind of bothered me, and I just was wondering if you knew it was true. It's more of a White House policy issue, I believe, but there's several military people here. And it's just another example of our president disengaging himself from the American people.
Well, there's, and we'll look into that and actually provide you with an answer. I think, and they've said to me that was the last question. I think that really what we're talking about here are two very different visions for the United States of America. And that's what we're looking at for November. It's what the presidential debate will be. It's what my race will be, and a lot of other races. My opponent believes that, and President and a lot of others, and they're well-intentioned people, but they think that the answers lie with the government. They think that the government should have the power to make decisions for us, for our families, and everything should go through the federal government. And I mentioned it earlier, and I'll say it again. The greatness of the United States of America is not because of the EPA or the OSHA or the Department of Labor. It is because of the American people who believe deeply in the values upon which this country was founded. And what we need to do is make sure that we protect and preserve their freedoms. You know, the Declaration of Independence says it all. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those rights that we have as American citizens come to us from nature and from God. They don't come to us from the federal government. But what we've seen over a number of years, as I mentioned, it just isn't now. It seems like it's been exacerbated. The policy starting in 2008. But what we have come to in this country is a point where the government is actually giving us rights, rather than their real job, which is protecting those rights. And that really is the debate and the discussion we're going to have about this election. And you know, my opponent and myself couldn't be any starker. His policies and his voting record indicate he thinks the government can figure it out and should really control our lives. And I'll say it, the greatness of this nation is because of all of you, who believe deeply in the values of the United States of America, that we are an exceptional nation, that the American dream should be alive and well, and the way we give our kids and our grandkids a better and a stronger nation is when we're more free, when there's more economic opportunity here, and when the government assumes its proper role, which is our national security, infrastructure, but they've come so far from that. And it's what we struggle with as Americans. And it's really the debate we're having as a nation as to what we want our nation to look like. And do we want it to become a welfare state like Greece? Right now, 50% of the American people are not paying taxes. So when we talk about, well, you just want to protect the wealthy and you want to give them tax breaks, well, they're the ones that are paying taxes. So the top 50%, they look at the tax breaks because they're the ones that are paying taxes. It's hard to give a tax break if you're not paying taxes. But we're at a crossroads in our country. And it's imperative, and I'm so grateful that you're all here this morning, that you're willing to engage in this discussion, and you're paying attention to the issues that face our nation. They're serious. The debt, our national security, sequestration, the cuts to the Department of Defense, the cuts to Medicare, the cuts to the veterans through sequestration are a grave concern to me. I voted against the Budget Control Act because it's not the right way to govern. And my party leadership said, no, don't go for it. And you don't give your authority to this 12 super committee that they put together. So this is what this November is about, and as we move forward as a nation, what we want our nation to look like. And I talked about Medicare, making sure that there is Medicare and there is Social Security for the seniors who have planned their retirements around it, making sure that we are responsible enough to protect and preserve and keep those programs alive and well. And I don't see a plan coming out anywhere other than Paul Ryan's plan. There's no other plan other than to raise taxes and to spend more money. So those are the discussions and the debate that we'll have as a nation going forward. But I want to thank all of you for being here this morning. Again, we'd like to have a few minutes with the whole dredging issue. Yes. And Deb and Matthew are here.
We'll meet right up here after the meeting. If anyone wants to join Matthew and myself up here, we'd love to entertain your thoughts.
Once again, if there's anything our office can do for you, we work with you, call our